All right. We are debating in this class for 5 days. For the first 3 days, everybody will participate. The last 2 days, the people who have been ranked the highest will advance to a single elimination bracket. But for those first 3 days, we will debate the 3 kinds of topic. We are going to spend today introducing what these topics are, what issues you debate, and we are going to think about the topics we are using in this class. And this is a good time for you to start submitting arguments if you haven't already, when you have an idea what the issues are. So, a topic of fact. A topic is a topic of fact if ultimately there is a right answer, we just don't know it. Some of these others, a topic of value, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. A topic of policy, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. But with a topic of fact, ultimately there is. There are different kinds of fact topics. I'm going to briefly describe 6 kinds to you. That's not all there are, but I would say these are the majority. You can have a fact topic about the nature of reality. You might say you could have a debate over human beings have free will. Ultimately, we do or we don't. And there are extensive arguments made both ways. That would be a debate over the nature of reality. You could debate whether the universe was created by an all-powerful creator or did it come into being randomly. Ultimately, either it has a creator or it didn't have a creator, and that is, what is the nature of reality? A second example, a scientifically open question that research could answer. One good topic that gets debated a lot. Do violent video games encourage violent behavior? Research is ongoing. There's some research that indicates, yes, it encourages it. There's other research, there are other findings that say, actually, violent video games are a release. They let you manage emotions that might lead to violent behavior in ways that are harmless. Another possibility, there's kind of, I think, a funny little argument going on between 2 professors in the United States. One named Stephen Austad at the University of Alabama, the other one named Jay Olshansky at the University of Iowa. Their argument is that human beings can live longer than 150 years. If I remember right, Austad says they can't. There are limitations built in the human body. Nobody will ever live longer than 150 years. It doesn't matter what medical science creates. 150 is longer than humans can live. And I believe at this point, the record for the longest anyone has lived is 122. So 150 is pretty far off from that. But then Professor Olshansky says, no, we're very close to big advances where people will live to be 150 and 200 and even longer. And they have a bet going on. And they have both put money into savings accounts because if anyone ever lives longer than 150, it will mean that Olshansky won the bet. So they have put something in place to pay it off. A third type of debate of fact, you can debate things from history. Things from history that we don't necessarily have the answer to. There are a surprising number of people who believe that William Shakespeare, the plays and the poems of William Shakespeare, were not written by William Shakespeare. They think William Shakespeare was a fake name, and that there was a noble, I believe the The Earl of Oxford is a common belief. The Earl of Oxford wrote the plays, wrote the poems, but would have been embarrassed to be identified as the author. So the Earl of Oxford used William Shakespeare as a pen name. And there are lively arguments on both sides. The thing I find interesting about that debate, lawyers look at the evidence, and there's a lot of evidence. Lawyers say, we are sure Shakespeare did not write his plays. He did not write the poems. But then English professors, literature professors, they read the few published works from the Earl of Oxford and from other people who are suggested as the real author, and they say, there's no way this person wrote Shakespeare's plays. So professors of literature go one way on that debate. Lawyers and judges go the other way. At one point a few years ago, the majority of the judges on the United States Supreme Court all believed that Shakespeare did not write his plays. So this is something that's a bit ongoing. Another example. In a few years before I was born, there was a president of the United States named John Kennedy. He was killed while in an open car going through my hometown, Dallas, Texas. He was shot. And at the time, we believed we knew who did it, a man named Lee Harvey Oswald. But since then, lots of people have said no. The United States Intelligence Agency killed him, or they have said organized crime killed him. But they've said someone else killed him and it was covered up. So you can debate, and I have seen people debate, Kennedy was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, and there's evidence that was true, or Kennedy was killed by another group and they covered it up. And you can look at that evidence as well. One of the best examples of a debate over fact, and one that resembles history, every time almost there is a criminal trial, the first issue has to be, did the accused commit the crime? So, a car is missing, and Kubota-san is accused of stealing the car. The prosecution has to introduce evidence that you stole the car. Your defense attorney will introduce evidence. The car may be missing, but you had nothing to do with it. And that is effectively a debate on a subject of fact, history. The car did vanish. It went somewhere. The owner does not have it. Did the accused do it? Okay, halfway through, 3 more types of topics of fact. Predictions. There are a lot of people informally debating right now, Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States, or Joseph Biden will be reelected as president of the United States. It's a good topic of fact because if we wait long enough, we will know. Eventually, there will be a right answer. You can also debate whether your favorite sports team will win the championship this season. Start that debate at the beginning of the season. There's lots of evidence. There are lots of arguments you can make. And if you wait long enough, there will be a right answer, which makes it a resolution of fact. You can debate hypotheticals. You can debate, could Darth Vader beat Voldemort in a fair fight? I've known a number of these to come out of history. If this particular general had not made this particular mistake, would this country have won the war instead of losing it? And it's a little bit unclear whether there's a correct answer, but it's based on actual events. And the evidence that you point to, you are making a claim this is what would have happened. This would have been the alternate, accurate history. So, wait, I didn't advance the slide, did I? That's what I should have done. Hypothetical. Hypothetical. In theory, could this happen? In theory, could Darth Vader beat Voldemort? In theory, if this general had not made this mistake, would this country have won the war? Sixth, and finally, definitions. You can have pretty good debates over questions of fact over how should something be defined. A popular one in the United States is a hot dog a sandwich. And there are arguments both ways. There was a landmark court decision, court case in the United States at the end of the 1800s over, was a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? It was written into the law that fruits were taxed at a different rate from vegetables. And most people would look at a tomato and say, vegetable. You slice it up, you put it in food with other vegetables. You don't eat it with bananas and oranges and apples. But botanically, it is a fruit. It has seeds inside flesh. So do you go with the scientific answer? Or do you go with, well, when we cook, this is what we do? One of my favorite topics of fact to spring on my debate students back in the United States is summer does not begin on June 21st. Now, I do not know in Japan if the practice is to call June 21st the solstice, the first day of summer. But in the United States, that's what they say. That's the first day of summer. Well, it depends. Are you going by the definition astronomically or by the meteorological, the weather definition? Because meteorologists will say summer is just the 3 hottest months of the year, and it's different in different parts of the world. North America, Australia have different summers. Glenn, you appear to have something on the tip of your tongue.
No, it's just that talking about definition, you gave your example, is tomato considered a fruit or vegetable?
Right.
It reminded me that recently in California, there was a case where somehow the defense won, considering that beef are fish.
Beef is a fish?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
They used so much legal loopholes and somehow managed to convince the court to be like, okay, these are fish, therefore they are not under like protected species.
I've got to find out what those arguments were. Yeah. Okay, so those are some possibilities. Those are different varieties of fact topics. When you debate a fact topic, there are 3 issues. First of all, you have to define any terms in the topic that need defining. Now that sounds kind of circular. How do you know what needs defining? Let me give you an example. The last time this class met, our game at the beginning of class was, I have the ugliest clothes in the room. That was us being silly. What if the topic was, I have the most expensive clothes in the room? And we were really debating it. Do you know what word we would need to define? Expensive, yes. Does expensive mean what you paid for it? Does expensive mean what you could get for it now if you tried to sell it? Does expensive mean how much it cost to produce it? Because maybe it was cheap, fast fashion and you just paid too much. Does that make it expensive, or does that mean you're not good at bargaining? So there are lots of different interpretations of that word, and how you define it makes a huge difference in how that debate happens. I'm going to put all of our fact topics up in a minute. when we've gone through all the issues here. And when I do, I want you to look at all those topics and look for words you think you might need to define. But for now, the second issue when you debate a fact topic: what counts as evidence? What counts as evidence? This is huge in criminal trials. We've already mentioned most criminal trials have lively debates over questions of fact. Did the defendant commit the crime? What counts as evidence? There are lots of things that don't count. Secondhand, what you heard someone else say, that's called hearsay, that is not admissible. Lie detectors called polygraphs, not admissible. I don't think they're admissible here. Throughout most of the world, they're not admissible in courtrooms. For a long time, hair and fiber evidence. We know you were at the scene of the crime because we found hair there, and it's the same color and curliness of hair as yours. But it's very not reliable and therefore not admissible. Fingerprints, they do count as evidence. We know how to collect them. They tend to be very good proof because they are individual to one person out of billions. So, what will we count as evidence? Now, when it comes to having actual debates, we might have a prediction debate. We might say, the economy will do better this year than it did last year. That would be a fact debate based on a prediction. And we might say things like, how the stock market is doing does not count as evidence. Lots of people think if the stock market's going up, that means the economy is improving. It doesn't mean that at all. That's a common misunderstanding. A number of years ago, there was a controversy over whether childhood vaccinations make children become autistic. They don't. But a lot of people told stories about, I have a friend, she had a 6-month-old baby, the baby was normal and happy, the baby got their shots, and in the next 3 to 6 months, the baby went backwards, stopped talking, and was then diagnosed autistic. So now I believe it. And the answer that a lot of doctors had to explain was individual stories are not sufficient proof. There are cases like that effectively, that's a coincidence. That person, that child had what was going to bring about the diagnosis of autism. We just didn't notice until they were about 9 months old. That's commonly when we notice. But when you look at tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of children, and you collect data, were they vaccinated? Were they autistic? The picture's very clear. There's no relationship. I say all that to say individual stories don't count as evidence. We call them anecdotes. Third and final question. Let me make sure I haven't missed anything there. Oh, yeah, I do have one more example. Maybe a slightly better example for what counts as evidence. On Tuesdays in here, I teach a class about how Christianity is an influence on how Westerners communicate. A fact topic you can have is, did Jesus really exist? Or was Jesus just a myth? And when you get to this question, what counts as evidence? If the topic was, Jesus never existed, and I was affirmative, I would say the Bible doesn't count. Because the Bible was written by people who were followers of the religion, and they were pushing the idea Jesus existed. So then the negative could point out that in the writings of Tacitus and Josephus and Pliny the Younger and Suetonius, all of whom were not Christian, they all mention that Jesus existed and that Jesus was crucified and all of that. But I, on the affirmative, might say, okay, I'll debate you on those other ancient writers, but the Bible doesn't count. So that's one of the issues you need to establish. What will count as evidence? Finally, what side does the evidence support? Fact topics are pretty simple to debate. Define your terms, what is and is not evidence, and once you've decided what is or is not evidence, what side does the evidence support? So, for example, are there alternate explanations? You might debate, and it's a good fact topic, intelligent life forms from other planets have visited Earth. So effectively you're debating unidentified flying objects. And when you get to this question, what side does the evidence support? The side arguing that aliens have visited the United States, aliens have visited Earth, they might point to a lot of different sightings that nobody can explain. And the negative might then need to explain each one of those. No, that one was a satellite. No, that one was a broken camera. You debate, what does the evidence show? To go back to my example of a criminal trial, the exhibits are introduced, the testimony is given by witnesses, and the prosecution and defense argue over what does this evidence add up to. That's where the real debate happens. And let me make sure. All right. Okay. Here are the fact topics we will debate. Release of the Fukushima water is safe. What terms do you think you need to define? Right. What do we mean by safe? Safe could be defined a lot of different ways. I think you need to define release. Does release mean controlled release? Does it make a difference where the water goes? What are the details of saying release the water? How about drivers over the age of 70 are unsafe?
Unsafe for what? Driving?
Right. What do we mean by unsafe? Does it count as unsafe if they scratch up their car but nobody's hurt and they're not hurt? Does someone have to be injured? Does it have to be someone other than them? How about drivers? Do bicycles count? Those are things you would need to clear up in defining your terms. The Yonaguni Monument was made by humans.
Which monument?
Say what?
No, I'm not. I don't know what is the Yonaguni monument. Is there like multiple or
The Yonaguni Monument is off, I think, the southern tip of Japan, underwater. There are some stone formations, and some people who've seen them said, this is a pyramid built by human beings. Why it's underwater, we don't know, but it shows signs it was built by humans. And other people look at it and say, your imagination. It's just rocks. Say what?
Just based off that, I was thinking it doesn't have to just be humans, it could also be animals. It could be the earth.
Sure. Those are arguments you can make, but here at the stage of defining terms, do you think there are any of these that we need to define further?
Maybe.
I was thinking, I used to have fun doing this when I was a coach. On the affirmative, your interpretation could be the humans who looked at the rocks and said, this is not natural, this is artificial, and they gave it the name. They made the monument by naming it. So that is true. The negative, of course, would throw a fit over that and say that's not a fair way to interpret the topic. It's not debatable if you interpret it that way. So the negative might want to make sure made by humans means originally, that it first came about by humans chiseling the rock. How about bread is healthier than rice? Right. Now, what are a couple of different ways you might define healthier?
Some people look at long-term health, some people look at, I want to be energetic.
Sure.
So I need more carbohydrates.
Sure. That's good, actually. Over a long-term diet, or are you going to go out and run a marathon today? I also think maybe you could say healthier includes fitting into your community, being properly enculturated. So maybe eating rice makes you fit in with your community better. And that's a form of health. How about Kim Jong, or actually, is there more to say about defining bread and defining rice? Say what? Well, you want to define healthier, definitely. But is there a way to define bread and a way to define rice that would give one side or the other an advantage?
Let's say porridge.
Porridge for rice.
Okay, porridge for rice. Would that be healthier or less healthy? Well, would you include brown rice? Would you include just white bread and white rice? Or would you say whole wheat bread and brown rice? Those go right to the question of what's healthier. Do you say the most processed version of each? Or the most whole grain version of each? How about Kim Jong-un will be the last Kim to rule North Korea? Good prediction topic. Because ultimately, he will be or he won't. What do you think you need to define there?
What is last?
That's a good argument to make when you get past the definitions, when you get to what does the evidence say. The negative might say his sister will and she's a Kim. Last, what does last mean?
So last Kim could be either his first name being Kim Jong-un or his last name, right? It could be another person named Kim.
Right.
It doesn't have to be specifically their family.
Right.
So if you talk to family or...
So you could interpret it on the affirmative. And typically, the affirmative at the beginning of the first speech will say, these are the terms in the topic that need defining. This term, and this term. Therefore, I interpret the topic to mean, and you restate the topic. Here, you might reasonably say, this topic says, Kim's family, all of whom carry the Kim name, will not rule North Korea after Kim Jong-un, for whatever reason, no longer rules it. Whether he dies of old age, whether he is toppled in a coup, nobody after him will be from his family. That's a way to interpret the topic. Is there another way to interpret it? Ooh.
Like, maybe he's not ruling in like the public image, maybe there's like a facade that is being ruled by someone else, but deep down he's still pulling the strings.
Ooh. So does rule mean publicly rule where everybody can see, or does rule mean actually make the decisions? And you might say rule means being a dictator. You rule when you can give commands and they're followed. What if, this is far-fetched, I don't think it would happen, what if North Korea became a democracy with Kim Jong-un as the head of state? He wouldn't rule anymore. He would just preside. You could interpret rule as meaning if North Korea liberalized its government, that would no longer be ruling. Okay, how about without exam hell, Japan would be weaker? Right. Define exam hell, pin down what you mean by that.
Also weaker.
Yes. What do we mean by weaker? Do we mean economically? Do we mean sociologically? Would losing that shared cultural experience mean a break with tradition, mean a lack of confidence that we can do difficult things? There are lots of ways to define weaker. So you would need to pay attention to that. On the day we debate fact topics, if you are the first speaker for the affirmative, be sure you spend a little of your speaking time looking at words that need defining. And if you're negative and the affirmative doesn't define any terms, you can come along and you can define them any way you like. If you debate the Fukushima water topic and you're the first negative speaker and the affirmative defines nothing, I would say, I'm going to define release as release the Fukushima water into the mouths of newborn babies. Because my opponent didn't define it, this is now what it means. They are now debating that's safe. And you just made it a lot harder on them. So be sure any words that need defining that you do it. Second question. What counts as evidence? What counts as evidence on this one? What would you think primarily, what kinds of evidence answer this question, true or false? Go for it, please. Gansan. Mm-hmm.
So if two person is debating and they have different definition of certain words,
very good.
Then they're gonna just not make any agreement of the definition and how
Right. So the way that happens, the question, in case it wasn't clear to everybody, what if the opposing debaters define the terms differently? What do you do then? Do you each just say, no, my definition's right. No, my definition's right. What you do, the short version of it is, you say, my definition will result in a more fair debate for both sides. Both sides have arguments that they can make, and this will be a good debate that we will both benefit from. So, for example, without exam hell, Japan would be weaker. And the affirmative might say, we will define weaker as the society will be less cohesive, it would be a break with tradition, and we would lose confidence that we can do difficult things. And the negative might say, we don't think that's a good definition of weaker. We think that it means physically weaker, and actually we think without exam hell, you could get out and exercise more. So we think the opposite is true. And the affirmative might say, in the first place, nobody really talks about well, maybe they do, the relationship between exam hell and whether people have muscles. So that definition is a little silly. And secondly, if you define it that way, there are not particularly good arguments for the affirmative. That's the negative trying to define us completely out of the debate. They're trying to win the debate before it begins by defining it in a way where there are not good arguments on both sides. But if you define it as Japan has a tradition of exam hell, Japanese people who make it through exam hell are proud of what they've accomplished, there are good negative arguments under that interpretation. We are being fair to our opponents. Their definition is not being fair to us. It doesn't leave us with good arguments to make. Does that help? Groovy. Okay. So, what kinds of evidence under the Fukushima water topic? One more time?
We need to know what happened to Fukushima water.
Well, the question I'm trying to put is, would you want scientific testimony about what's in the Fukushima water? Would you want poems about the Fukushima water? I mean, there are debate topics where poetry is evidence. I don't think this is one of them. Do you think primarily scientific testimony about whether it's radioactive and what the effect of radioactivity would be? But we talked at the second class meeting when we talked about narrativity, and we talked about argument is often evaluated as two competing narratives. The communication professor who introduced that perspective, he said, his example was actually, his favorite example was a city in the United States where they were arguing about whether they could dump industrial waste. And the scientists all said it's safe. But the people who lived there said, we don't feel safe. Could you say then, the testimony of people who would be living where the water would be released, that is also evidence. That counts. Because safety is not something measurable, it's a feeling. And if you don't feel safe, you're not safe. What would you do for drivers over the age of 70? What would count as evidence? There you go. Studies done, breaking down statistically, per capita of older drivers, how likely are they to be in accidents? What if, on the negative, you wanted to say, fault in accidents is often determined by the police officer, and police officers are notoriously biased against old people. And they will rule an accident an old person's fault, even if it was a distracted younger person. If an old person was involved, they'll just say it was the old person's fault. If you could back that up, you might say reports of accidents shouldn't count as evidence. Instead, maybe you say scientific research into the reaction time, into the eyesight, the decision time of people over 70, that's evidence, but accident reports are not because they're biased. And you could use that to filter what evidence ought to count. I mean, I made that argument as an example. I'm with you. I think we should look at accident reports. But that is what you do in fact debates. What counts, what doesn't. How about the Yonaguni Monument? What counts, what doesn't as evidence? How would you decide if rocks that you found underwater, if they had actually been built by humans, or if they were just rocks that look like that? What kind of evidence?
Maybe there are some ancient historic documents on the rocks that you could find.
Right. So is there a community that left behind other artifacts, writings, and so forth? Now, if there's not, does that mean the negative just wins? That the affirmative has to produce that?
They did try, what if the rocks were a result of some weathering or erosion, and it was a natural occurring thing?
And that, I think, is the argument that the negative would make. But what I'm asking is, what evidence would bear on that? What counts as evidence? If you go and you look at this controversy, you're going to find that the guys who argue in favor of it, who say this was made by humans, they have all these details, but then the people who say no, it wasn't made by humans, they say that's junk science.
So what about like other historical monuments that we weren't sure were made by humans, like
Right.
the Stonehenge? We weren't sure that was made by humans.
Stonehenge, we're sure.
Something. But that's where I started thinking.
Right.
I'm trying to think of other.
Visually aspects of the rocks, and people can say, well, that can't be done by nature, that can only be done by human types.
Right, so the two scientific fields, there's geology, and geologists will say, natural geological processes can make rocks that look like this. I mean, natural processes can make rocks that are perfectly spherical, that look like a human had to have made this. Nope, that came about naturally. On the other hand, anthropologists are the ones who say, around the world, we've seen what kinds of monuments people made. We can tell that's a monument. And when you get into what's published about the Yonaguni monuments, the people saying it's human-made, they'll point to features of it. But then the people saying it's not, they say That's junk science. That's not good geology. It's not good anthropology. What do you think?
I was thinking maybe since it, if I was to believe that it is man-made, that would mean that the soil around it or anything around it was probably moved around. That means fossils probably moved.
But isn't it underwater?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Checkmate. That was good. That's good though. But this is, by the way, this is what we do in preparation for debates. We workshop. So if you at any point have a really good argument you like and you speak up and someone else shoots it down, it doesn't mean you did badly. It means we all contribute. Okay? Okay. So I am looking at the time. We have not even started talking about value topics. So I think we're going to leave it there as far as defining terms and what counts as evidence. Once you've decided what counts as evidence, it's pretty easy to review the evidence and make the strongest case possible for your side. But let's talk about how value topics work. There are, first of all, not 6 kinds of value topics. By and large, there are 2. There is the comparison. Those are my favorites. Dogs make better pets than cats is a value topic, and it's a comparison. There is not a right answer. Some people will say dogs, some people will say cats. Neither one is wrong. Cake is a better dessert than ice cream is another easy one. Good arguments both ways. It's a value judgment, and it's a comparison. The other one, the other broad category of value topics, is putting a specific label on a particular kind of behavior. So, for example, if I were to say, forgetting to give someone back their textbook the night before an exam is stealing. Stealing is a value judgment. It's not an innocent mistake. It's a crime. It's something that you've done something wrong and you have to apologize for it. If I were to say, giving someone, and this is a live controversy right now, giving someone with a terminal illness enough medication that they can end their life with an overdose is murder. You could say that, you could debate that. There are arguments for it, arguments against it. It is a value topic, and it's labeling. Do we call that murder, or do we call that medicine? Because medicine relieves suffering. And if they're going to die anyway, and the only way to extend their life is make them suffer more. Now, I don't agree with either side of that topic, but that's an example of a value topic that would be labeling. When you debate value topics, there are 3 issues. The first one is familiar. You've got to define your terms. And when I get the value topics we're going to use in here up, we will look for words that we need to define. Second, the value premise. Value premise. When you are considering a topic, you start by asking, what is it that you are trying to maximize? What is the most important consideration in making this judgment? Let's go back to dogs versus cats. What's the most important quality for a pet to have? What makes a pet a good pet? Yeah, a good pet should be fun. So maybe your value premise is fun. A pet should be fun. And then you establish criteria. Dang it. What makes a pet fun? How do you know that a pet is fun? What's the measure of fun for a pet? Well, is that maybe just restatement of fun, entertainment? Say what?
Will they they do things with me? Will they,
Whether it can do a flip or not.
A clip?
A flip.
A flip. Whether they can do a flip. So, when you're picking what your value premise is, you have to keep in mind what side of the topic you're on. So if it was dogs make better pets than cats, and I'm affirmative, I might begin by saying, my value premise is fun. My criteria for fun is affection. A pet should like you. A pet should be really impressed with you and obey your commands. Because if I define fun that way, are cats better than dogs by those measures? Cats can be affectionate. Cats sometimes do what you want. But compared to dogs, I want to stack the deck to where I want to set the debate up to where I am more likely to win. So I would say, fun, the criteria is affection. And then my arguments for my side, the case for my side, dogs are more affectionate than cats. That makes them more fun. That's why they're a better pet. Now, when I'm negative, I might say, I accept my opponent's value. Fun. A pet should be fun. We agree on that. We will not be debating that. But my criteria are different. I'm going to borrow Islam San's argument and say, entertainment. Dogs, they're clumsy, they're slobbery. Cats, on the other hand, are crazy. Cats will hunt. You can get a laser pointer. You can get one of those things that's almost like a fishing pole, and they'll swat it and they'll chase it. And it's so much more entertaining to watch a cat use its instincts to try to kill something. Dogs, on the other hand, dogs, they'll lick you. They like you. You might as well get a stuffed animal. So that's a case you might make for the opposite side. My criteria are different. I have another example that I think is even a little bit more straightforward. You might have the topic, a Volvo makes a better car than a Prius. A Volvo makes a better car than a Prius. When you go car shopping, what's the most important thing? What should a car be to be a good car that you want to buy? One more time. You can drive it. Okay. Can you drive both a Volvo and a Prius? Then that's equal for both. What'd you say?
Which one goes faster?
Okay. So the Volvo and Prius, neither one of those is particularly fast. What if I made the argument? What if you're judging and I'm debating and I said, the value premise for which car is better is safety. Because driving a car, riding in a car is dangerous. Car accidents are one of the number one ways people are killed. So the safer car is the better car. Criteria, safety features, and what accident records show about how likely people are to survive an accident. That's the value premise and criteria I would adopt if I were affirmative. Because I would say Volvos have a solid steel frame, and the number of people who are injured or killed in an accident, if they're in a Volvo, is the lowest of any brand of car. That's how I would debate that. Volvo is a better car than a Prius because safety is more important than anything, and the features and the track record of a Volvo mean that it's safer. Now, if I'm negative, I would say my value premise is global safety. My criteria is what car contributes the least to global warming. And I would say Volvos, because they're so heavy, produce a lot of carbon emission. Priuses are the most carbon neutral car sold. And I would then make the arguments, my opponent said safety, but be honest, accidents are rare. Have you been in one? Accidents happen to people, but they're rare. Putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, every single time you turn a car on, you're doing it. This is a problem happening all the time, and climate change is affecting all of us. So if I'm negative, I might say that's why my value and my criteria are more important than my opponents, and why a Prius is a better car than a Volvo. Okay, let us look at our value topics. Cherry blossom viewing is a waste of time. Is that comparison or is that labeling? Labeling, yes, you are labeling it. It's calling something stealing, calling something murder, calling something a waste of time, but it's a value judgment. It's not a factual claim. What do you think your value premise might be? When you spend your time on something, what's the most important thing that should come out of you spending your time? Time is money. So maybe you say, my value premise is profit. The things you do with your time should be profitable. Cherry blossom viewing, not profitable at all. So waste of time. If I'm negative, I might say, the things you do ought to make good memories. And then maybe my criteria are good memories are of what is beautiful. Beautiful encounters with people, beautiful encounters with nature. Cherry blossom viewing is beautiful. It's therefore a good use of time. How about, it's not worth the risk to onsens to pursue geothermal energy? Is that labeling or is that comparison? Onsens are more important, or continuing to have onsens is more important than pursuing geothermal energy. And that's a value judgment. What, if you were affirmative, what do you think your value premise would be? You're the one saying, we need to make sure onsens exist, and you don't want to pursue geothermal energy. What would you want to maximize? Say again? Risk. You want to maximize risk? You're thinking good. Keep thinking. You're doing good.
Health and safety.
Onsens are typically known to be more healthy
Ooh.
for your skin,
Ooh.
healthy for like your
Okay.
body.
Okay.
Safe, and the reason I say it's health and
Right.
safety
Uh-huh.
is because geothermal energy, well, energy like nuclear energy,
Right.
it's very eruptive, or it's
Sure.
very hard to contain.
Right.
So that's
See,
one thought.
and that would be tricky if you're affirmative and you say, my value premise is health. If I were the negative, I would think, oh boy. Because you're saying, let's not do geothermal. Geothermal would mean less nuclear, less fossil fuel, less air pollution. All those are health factors, and they're bigger than going to the onsen. So what could you say if you're defending onsens? What would you say is important that you want to maximize?
People who use the onsen, maybe their well-being and happiness and joy.
The onsen owners, they are more important than the rest of us. So, and when your opponent says, why are they more important than the people who aren't onsen owners? What would your answer be?
Because they're alive now, and pursuing geothermal energy is only benefiting people in the future who get to reap the benefits of a good source of energy.
Well, but the onsens wouldn't stop operating until the geothermal came online, so the only people hurt are the ones in the future, right? And my question was, how do you, if your opponent just says, not that many people operate onsens, but not having energy supplies available affects everybody. Like, what do you do with that argument?
I always think, I interpreted the thing as risk to onsen, as in the onsen like getting destroyed, and
Right.
then the people who use it can't use it anymore. I wasn't really considering the people who own the onsen.
Oh, okay. So onsen users as well. Okay, that does make some sense. So the users of onsens, their well-being. Okay. Can we think of any other values that you might pick if you're affirmative for that topic? Why is it important to protect onsens? Not just the experience of the people who use them. Why are onsens, they're healthy, people who use them enjoy them? Tradition. I think tradition's a good argument. I think you could say tradition is fragile. Tradition holds a culture together. And if geothermal energy means the onsens dry up, that's another blow to tradition. And we have other ways we can get energy. So I think that would be a good one to pursue. Japanese young adults have a duty to bear children. Comparison or labeling? Labeling, definitely labeling. It could be a policy topic if it just said Japanese young adults should have children. We'll talk about that in a minute, but have a duty to bear children. Let's see. I do want to get to talking about policy topics, so once again, I'm going to jump ahead. So, policy topics. We talked before, policy topics, I don't have multiple types to talk about. A policy topic is very simple. It's almost anything around this word. Policy topics ask, what should we do? We should have a takoyaki party is a policy topic. We should have another golden week is a policy topic. The Japanese government should raise taxes is a policy topic. This one's about what's true. This one's about what's better and worse or morally judge-worthy. This is what should we do. And the issues that come up when you debate policy topics, there are 3 different ways to label them. That one is familiar, definitions. And then you can think of the other issues as problem, root cause, solution. I'm not going to leave that up very long. It will be on the slides if you want to see it later. But debaters, competitive debaters commonly, not universally, but commonly, describe the same issues as significance, inherency, solvency. Problem, why is this significant? Inherency, what is the root cause to this problem? Solvency, how would your proposal address or solve the problem? When I teach this to beginners, this is what I do because I have found it helps them think about it. Symptoms, you go to the doctor when something's wrong, and you tell the doctor, this is what hurts, this is what's not working properly. That is the problem, or that is the significance. The doctor runs a lot of tests, asks you a lot of questions, and has a diagnosis. The doctor says, this is what you've got. You are coughing, and you are having trouble sleeping because you have COVID, or because you have allergies, and it'll go away on its own, or because you have lung cancer, and you have 1 month to live. So, here are your symptoms, here's your diagnosis. Based on the diagnosis, here is your prescription. My symptom is I have a headache. The diagnosis is you need glasses, so I'm going to give you a prescription for glasses. Or you have a brain tumor, so I'm going to prescribe chemotherapy. What the prescription is depends on the diagnosis. And in policy debates, you identify the problem. You say, what is the root cause of this problem that keeps it coming back? And based on that, why is your proposal, your solution, why is it the right thing to do to address the problem? Let's look real quick at these. Japanese secondary schools should stop requiring uniforms. Can anyone think of a problem in Japanese secondary schools that comes from the requirement of uniforms? Why are uniforms, school uniforms, bad?
Lack of self-expression.
Okay, so At a time in life when you're working on who you are, you don't get to express yourself through clothes. The root cause of this is it is a long tradition, and it's part of the culture that everyone should look alike, everyone should behave alike. The solution: stop requiring uniforms, and then people will be able to express themselves when they are teenagers and need to. Japan should make its history textbooks more accurate. Let me mention one thing before we break this into the issues. There are 2 topics on this list that are broad. Sometimes policy topics are very, very specific. We should go to the food truck between these 2 buildings and order number 3. That's a specific policy topic. But you could also have, we should go get something to eat that is not Japanese food. And there are lots of options. Policy topics are sometimes broad, and there are lots of examples that could fit within the wording of the topic. This is one. More accurate. What would that mean? The affirmative would need, in their first speech, to say, this is what I'm proposing. The change to Japanese history textbooks should be this. Come down here. Japanese schools should make major changes to how they teach English. If you get this topic, the first affirmative speaker will need to say, this is what I propose should change in the way English is taught in Japanese schools. These topics are worded broadly, sometimes to give the affirmative choices, to be strategic, sometimes to pick something the negative might not have thought of. But let's see. Japan should kick the U.S. military out of Okinawa. Can anyone think of a problem from the U.S. military being in Okinawa?
The local Okinawa kids are scared of the big, scary U.S. military men.
The U.S. military men over the years have committed some really horribly nasty crimes in Okinawa, and they fall under the jurisdiction of the U.S. military, so they're whisked away, and in some cases, children who've been raped by U.S. service personnel never find out what happened. They never get any kind of closure, or they never feel safe again. So, lots of violent crime. What's the root cause of it? Well, you have 2 different legal systems. Okinawa has the regional and national Japanese system, and the military base is American military justice. So this is always going to be a problem. So what's the solution? Kick them out. That'll solve the problem. Problem, root cause, solution. This one, I used this one over at Tsuda last fall. I didn't know how it was going to go over, but they loved it. The imperial line of succession should include female dynasts. Carefully chosen words, but it just means if the next person in line is a woman should become empress. It shouldn't pass to the next male. So, what's a problem that might come from only men becoming emperor in Japan?
Japan wants more women in power anyway.
Right.
And so having one in power would be beneficial.
Right.
So gives a model.
Right. So Japan has a problem with too few women in leadership, and this is a problem in global business. This is a problem with sexism at every level of Japanese society. What is the diagnosis? What's the root cause of this? A lot of tradition. Japan has very polarized gender roles. Traditional Japanese culture, the gender roles are very hierarchical. What's the solution? A woman ascending to the chrysanthemum throne and being Empress of Japan. That would strike right at the heart of the culture and show, even though it's ceremonial power, a woman can inherit it. And it was great at Tsuda. I rigged how the sides were assigned. We had 3 against 3 debates when they had the class. I took the 3 best debaters and made them negative, and 3 of the weakest debaters in the class were affirmative with this topic, and it was unanimous for the affirmative. And not because the other students in the class just agreed with the topic. The affirmative debaters just did a great job. Okay. People without children should pay higher taxes. Is there a problem in Japan that has something to do with the number of children and the economy? How would you describe that? Japan has a low birth rate and a hyper-aging society. There are lots of problems that result. What's the root cause of this? There are lots of root causes. Yeah, people aren't having children, and there are lots of influences that make people not have children. So, what's the prescription? If people who don't have children pay more taxes, then there's more money to provide services to the aging population. And if you don't want to pay high taxes, just have some kids. That'll also help solve the problem. Now, there are problems with that proposal, but at that point, you have a good debate. All right. So, that brings us to the end of introducing the types of topics: fact, value, policy, the issues for each. We have about 7 minutes left, and I am thinking whether I have any... Oh, I didn't give you a question that we are going to debate next week, and I haven't really thought of one. Can any of you think of, for our game at the beginning of class, like what should the question be? We've done, I have the ugliest clothes, I have the best friend. Anyone have an idea? Definition of a fish. I worry that it would be hard for everybody to have a different one. I think everybody would have the same one. Because if you can talk about your friend or your clothes or your golden week, everyone's in a better position to have their own argument.
Which sports is the best?
Which what?
Sports.
Ooh, okay.
How about which major?
Okay. Which major is the best? Well, how many majors do we have represented in here?
My breakfast is the best.
My breakfast is the best. My breakfast could be the best. Especially because we do better with silly topics. I worry if we got to a topic that someone might actually believe, then feelings might get hurt. Okay, my breakfast is the best. That's going to be hard. You don't want to hear what I have for breakfast. No, okay. Let me see. Let me real quick look, because I have managed to space on what is happening in the weeks to come. So this will be just another minute or so. Come on. Boom. Because we are fairly soon, because we got ahead of the class schedule. We're going to have a day when we walk through a debate, so you see how they work and what is supposed to happen. Okay, here we go. Come on, load. So, argument schemes is next week. Evidence and case construction is after that. Negative strategy. So June 9th will be the day that we have the walkthrough debates. June 9th is also the day the fact topics are due. So that is that's 4 weeks from now. And then the value topic arguments and policy topic arguments are due in the weeks following. Yeah, I can't think of anything that I need to say by way of announcements. Just go, if you can, into Moodle and be sure, before you submit arguments, be sure that you go to everybody's submissions. And it's kind of encouraging that right now there's nothing. If you went right now, you could submit your one argument for 2 of the 6 topics, because nobody's picked anything. But what you'll need to do is see, are there topics where we have already maxed out the number of arguments that we need? And actually, because we are down to 18, I probably need to recalculate how many arguments I can take from everybody. So that's something I will do, and I will come next time with an announcement of how many arguments we can have on each topic. Okay. Okay, do you have anything you want to ask me about things coming up? Yes?
What did the Suda students argue about? How did they win the debate? The one about imperialism?
The affirmative just made the fairly direct arguments. The imperial household is just sexist. It's outdated and sexist. There's no reason that only emperors belong on the throne. There have been empresses deep in the past. We have a real problem with sexism in Japan today, and women being in the top position would send the signal. Women are just as capable of being leaders as men. And I talked with the negative debaters after, because we were talking, they said, what could we have said? This was really, really hard. And I said, well, if you want women to be taken seriously, would you have them enter beauty pageants? And they said, no, that'd be condescending. And I said, the emperor doesn't have any power. All the emperor does is stand around and look pretty. You don't want women doing that. They already are put in that position. Make them CEOs of corporations. Make them generals in the military. That's what will give them status, not the throne. That, I think, would have been an argument.
I was going to say, just for that, I was thinking about, because it's just seen.
Right.
This is a figure. Now you give men more reason to say, well, they have power.
Right.
So why
Yes.
do we have to
Very
give them
good.
more power?
Buys them off. It's a Band-Aid instead of real systemic change. That's the way to make the argument. Okay. Let me send you away with my blessing. Shuga anata o shukufukushi anata o mamoremasu yoni. Shuga miko o anata ni terashi anata ni megumaremasu yoni. Shuga miko o anata ni muke anata ni heano adairaremasu yoni. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Weather's getting ugly. Don't get wet. I will see you next week.
It's rainy season.
It's coming.